You have carried a weight inside your chest for years. Maybe you learned to speak over it, to smile above it, to act as though it never existed. But something inside you still remembers, the emotional scar from the moment life changed. The day trust was broken, the moment love disappeared, the instant innocence died. Trauma does not always announce itself through visible damage. Sometimes it lives quietly as tension, emotional numbness, or a silent fear of truly being seen. Guilt shapes a person the same way a sculptor shapes stone, removing parts that once belonged. Some people call it maturity, others call it experience. But deep inside, a voice whispers that something sacred went missing along the way. And regret is the ghost that follows us into tomorrow. It haunts decision-making, poisons potential, and convinces the heart that a better life exists but always beyond reach. There is a reason people feel trapped in cycles of pain, self-sabotage, or doubt. There is a reason the past repeats itself in new forms. It is not because healing is impossible. It is because most people attempt to heal by fighting reality instead of decoding it. They try to bury what hurt them, hoping it will die in the dark. But darkness only grows when ignored. Unresolved pain has a way of disguising itself. It rarely announces its presence by name. Instead, it hides beneath habits, emotional triggers, unexplained anxieties, mood swings, and patterns that make no logical sense. It can even appear as overachievement, perfectionism, or chronic independence. Most people think trauma only belongs to those who survived visible tragedy, war, violence, abuse, but emotional truth is rarely that simple. Trauma is anything that changed you in a way you did not choose. It may have been a betrayal you never healed from, a silence that wounded more than harsh words ever could, a disappointment that crushed your faith in love, or a moment of abandonment that rewired your nervous system to fear closeness. These are not small things. These are psychological constructs that shape the future without permission. Unresolved memory is not just a recollection of the past. It is a living force inside the psyche that continues to operate long after the event has ended. The body stores the experience, the nervous system rewires itself around survival, and the subconscious mind stamps a belief onto existence itself, one that shapes self-image, perception, and destiny. This is why certain people feel trapped in emotional cycles that repeat across time. They find themselves drawn to the same kind of partners, even though they swore to themselves they would never repeat that dynamic again. They attract similar disappointments in new forms, replaying emotional injuries with different faces. They feel stuck between wanting change and subconsciously resisting it. This does not happen because destiny is cruel, but because memory is not passive. It has momentum. When people try to escape their emotional pain by ignoring it, suppressing it, or hiding behind spiritual bypassing, they unknowingly give it more power. What the conscious mind rejects, the subconscious mind preserves. What is refused expression will later return as emotional turbulence, anger without a cause, sadness without a name, or fear without a clear source. This is the essence of unresolved memory. It persists until acknowledged. Guilt, however, is a prison constructed differently. It is self-judgment polished into a philosophy of existence. People who carry deep guilt do not simply remember what they did or failed to do. They begin to believe they deserve their suffering. They wear shame like a chain around the soul. Outer opportunities pass by them not because life does not want to give, but because guilt rejects the gift. If someone believes they're unworthy, even blessings feel dangerous. They sabotage happiness because part of their psyche believes happiness must be earned, and they are not done suffering yet. This silent psychology controls behavior beneath awareness. Regret emerges when a person believes that a single moment, one decision, one mistake, one lost chance, permanently damaged the trajectory of their life. It becomes a haunting presence, not a memory, but an obsession. The mind returns to it repeatedly like a ritual of self-torment. Regret convinces the mind that time is the enemy and the future is already ruined. It imprisons imagination and rewrites identity through self-condemnation. And yet most people do not realize these internal prisons are built from interpretation, not truth. Trauma, guilt, and regret survive because the mind repeats the same inner narrative unchallenged. The emotional charge stays alive because it is fed by attention. The story is retold so many times that it becomes a hidden personal doctrine. And once a story becomes identity, the person no longer carries pain, pain carries the person. It defines their tone of voice, their posture, their choices, even their expectations of love. But there is a deeper dimension to this. Emotional imprisonment is not simply psychology, it is metaphysical. It shapes reality because consciousness behaves like a magnet. Belief attracts experience. When someone believes, consciously or unconsciously, that life is unsafe, they begin to unknowingly move in ways that validate that belief. They hesitate, distrust, and sabotage connection. When someone believes they are unworthy, the universe seems to mirror that belief. Opportunities feel distant, relationships fail, potential feels unreachable. Not because life denies them, but because inner reality commands outer experience. And this cycle continues until consciousness is brought back to awareness, until memory is no longer allowed to define fate. People spend years running from their inner world in fear of opening locked doors. They worry that revisiting emotional wounds will break them. The truth is the opposite. What breaks a person is not facing their pain, it is living for decades controlled by it. Running from the past is not protection, it is a form of self-abandonment. And the soul can only endure abandonment for so long before it begins to call out for healing in louder and louder ways. First, through discomfort. Then through emotional breakdown. Then through what some call spiritual awakening, the point where everything collapses because the truth demands to be faced. Pain does not disappear by accident, it must be released. Unresolved memory must be brought into conscious awareness. Guilt must be understood rather than feared. Regret must be humbled by wisdom. None of this happens through denial, it happens through transformation. That transformation begins when a person understands that healing is not about fixing the past, it is about rewriting its meaning. The mind clings to pain not because it desires suffering, but because it formed a belief that pain is safer than truth. Only when that belief dissolves does emotional freedom begin. And this is where the deeper journey begins, not through force, not through forgetting, but through inner release. The past is over. What remains is only the emotional agreement to keep carrying it. Once that agreement is broken, a new reality becomes possible. Human beings are convinced they see the world as it truly is, yet that is a carefully crafted illusion. What we call reality is not purely made of events, matter, or objective facts. It is constructed from internal interpretation. Every moment you experience is filtered through unseen mental architecture, past experiences, subconscious beliefs, emotional imprints, and internal definitions about who you are and how life works. Two people can walk through the same fire, one emerges wiser, the other traumatized for life. Why? Because reality is not what happens. Reality is what your consciousness does with what happens. The mind is not a passive receiver of life. It is an active generator of meaning. It shapes emotional reality first, then emotional reality shapes physical experience. Most people do not realize this because they were trained to believe life happens to them rather than through them. So they blame the outer world for their suffering, unaware that the true source of pain lies in the coded beliefs embedded inside the psyche. Memory forms beliefs, beliefs form identity, identity forms perception, perception forms experience, experience reinforces belief. That loop is the hidden engine of reality. It is also why pain repeats. When a child grows up feeling unseen, they form the silent belief, I do not matter. That belief becomes identity. That identity then unconsciously attracts relationships with emotionally distant people. The child becomes an adult who keeps experiencing emotional neglect. This reinforces the original belief, strengthening the illusion that it is true. But it is not true. It is self-perpetuated programming. A story that sustains itself not because it reflects reality, but because consciousness obeys whatever it believes. Emotion is the language of the subconscious mind. Logic does not shape destiny, emotion does. People try to change their lives using willpower and forced positivity, yet they fail because their emotional state contradicts their thoughts. You can think 1,000 times, I am strong, but if your emotional body is still tied to a memory of helplessness, your subconscious will not obey the mind. The emotional imprint overrides the affirmation. This is why affirmations often feel empty. why motivation fades, and why behavioral change rarely lasts. You cannot upgrade your life while staying loyal to emotional beliefs rooted in fear and unworthiness. The subconscious is the architect of behavior. It repeats whatever it believes to be safe, even when those beliefs are harmful. If your nervous system associates love with betrayal, you will attract emotionally unavailable partners, not because that is what you truly want, but because your emotional memory believes it is safer to repeat the known than to trust the unknown. This mechanism is why self-sabotage exists. Self-sabotage is not hatred of the self. It is protection based on outdated emotional logic. What feels painful is not the present moment itself, it is the emotional interpretation layered onto it. When someone rejects you, pain is not generated by the rejection. Pain is generated by the belief attached to it. I'm not lovable. I'm not enough. Something is wrong with me. Those beliefs do not come from the present. They come from accumulated emotional history. You are not reacting to life. You are reacting to your story about life. Yet here lies a quiet miracle. If meaning creates suffering, meaning can also dissolve it. If the mind created the prison, the mind can also unlock the door. But not through denial, not through pretending, not through running, not through forcing change. Reality bends only to truth. Emotional reality shifts only when the emotional command beneath it is released. You cannot heal while arguing with truth. You cannot elevate consciousness while secretly insisting that the past should have been different. You cannot unlock higher states of awareness while holding emotional contracts with pain. The law of emotional reality is simple, but often misunderstood. What you resist, you reinforce. What you accept, you release. Acceptance is not approval. It does not endorse what happened. It does not justify it, excuse it, or romanticize it. Acceptance is a spiritual and psychological mechanism. It ends energetic resistance, and when resistance ends, suffering loses its fuel. Pain cannot heal while being fought. It heals when it is allowed to complete its cycle. Completion begins with recognition. Healing begins when the inner command changes. Most people never change their inner command. They pray but remain attached to the pain. They journal but still cling to the wound. They meditate but never release the emotional conclusion they formed long ago. They want healing without surrender. They want peace without transformation. They want a new life without shedding the beliefs that created the old one. This is why they repeat emotional cycles. This is why spiritual awakening sometimes feels like emotional breakdown, because the soul attempts to free itself by forcing someone to face the truth. The truth is simple. Emotional reality creates physical reality. Until emotional reality changes, life cannot expand. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are at the emotional level. Every feeling is a signal. Every emotional trigger is a doorway. Every pattern is a clue, and every wound is a teacher waiting to be understood. Once the emotional code is decoded, life changes, not gradually, but drastically. Because healing is not a process of adding anything new. Healing is removal. It is deletion. It is the end of emotional distortion. It is the return to wholeness. And there is a way to do this, an ancient hidden method that dissolves emotional resistance. It begins with a sentence that unlocks the subconscious. A sentence that reclaims power from the past. A sentence that changes emotional reality at its root. That sentence is coming, but before we arrive there, we must understand the law behind the sentence. The law that governs trauma, the law that governs guilt, the law that governs regret, the law that shapes emotional destiny. And once you see that law, you will never see reality the same way again. There is a hidden principle, a law of existence that governs not only human emotion but reality itself. It has been whispered through the corridors of mystical traditions, encoded in Hermetic teachings, preserved in Eastern meditation practices, and embedded in the contemplative insights of ancient philosophers. It is the law that explains why trauma does not fade, why guilt haunts the psyche, and why regret endlessly rewinds the story of our lives. This law can be summarized simply. Your inner state shapes your outer reality. What exists within consciousness inevitably radiates outward, creating circumstances, relationships, and experiences that mirror the energy held inside. Most people live unaware of this law. They fight the world as if the enemy is outside, seeking solutions through external action, while the root cause festers in the unseen realms of mind and emotion. Trauma becomes a recurring pattern because the subconscious mind interprets it as truth. Guilt lingers because it is an unresolved energy demanding recognition. Regret loops endlessly because the mind insists that the past must dictate the future. The world is not punishing anyone. The world is responding faithfully to the commands of consciousness. Life is a mirror, and the image it reflects is only as distorted as the lens through which it is perceived. What makes this law both terrifying and liberating is that it is impersonal. It does not judge. It does not care about morality or fairness. It does not demand repentance. It simply obeys. Consciousness is a magnetic force. It pulls into life the energy it emits. Emotional patterns function as attractors in the quantum field, shaping outcomes in ways subtle and profound. If fear dominates your interior, fear shapes the trajectory of your days. If shame dominates your identity, shame manifests as circumstances that reinforce its existence. If regret loops endlessly, reality continues to replay the same lessons until the soul chooses to release the attachment. This law is the invisible architect behind the suffering that most people call life. It explains why psychotherapy, surface-level affirmations, and even prayer often fail to produce deep, lasting change. Knowledge alone is powerless without integration. Words alone cannot undo the energetic imprint of a belief. The subconscious mind does not respond to logic. It responds to alignment between thought, emotion, and energetic conviction. Healing, therefore, is not an intellectual pursuit. It is an energetic realignment. It is the transformation of internal command from suffering to liberation. And this is precisely why a single, perfectly structured sentence can hold immense transformative power. A sentence that does not try to argue with the past, condemn what happened, or demand that reality be rewritten according to desire. A sentence that operates at the level of energetic truth, neutralizing resistance while commanding release. A sentence that acknowledges the event, the emotion, and the self, and in the same breath restores sovereignty over consciousness. That sentence is, I let it be as it is, and I set myself free. It is deceptively simple, but its simplicity is what allows it to penetrate the labyrinth of subconscious conditioning. I let it be as it is dissolves resistance. It ends the struggle against the facts of life, releasing the mind from the fight that drains power. It is radical acceptance, a surrender not to the limitation but to the truth of what happened. And I set myself free reclaims authority over your inner world. It commands the subconscious to release energetic attachment to pain, guilt, and regret, freeing identity from narratives that no longer serve it. To speak this sentence is not passive. It is not weakness. It is the most potent act of inner mastery. The past does not disappear. It is remembered, integrated, and transformed. Emotional wounds do not vanish by denial, they dissolve through recognition and conscious release. This law does not bend for ignorance or half-hearted attempts. It bends only for those willing to confront the truth, that the power to shape reality is always in their hands, and the only obstacle is their own unresolved interior. Humanity has carried suffering for millennia, not because pain is inevitable, but because knowledge of this law was hidden, obscured, or misunderstood. Ancient initiates, mystics, and sages understood it. They knew that emotional and spiritual liberation is never about chasing external solutions. It is about decoding the inner mechanics of consciousness. Trauma is an equation, guilt is a function, regret is a loop, and each can be recalibrated. Once the formula is understood, the equation can be solved, the function can be rewritten, the loop can be broken. And here is the critical truth most overlook. Liberation does not come by eliminating memory, by erasing guilt, or by ignoring regret. Liberation comes from redefining their energetic meaning inside your consciousness. Once the inner command changes, the outer world immediately reflects that recalibration. The law obeys with precision. Consciousness is not a vague abstraction. It is the engine that constructs reality. To release trauma, guilt, and regret is to rewrite the program that projects the world you see. This is the ultimate mystical key. Once the hidden law is understood, the past loses its authority and freedom emerges, not as a distant goal, but as an immediate experience within the moment. Every human being carries a wound so central to their life that it shapes reality itself. For some, it is the pain of abandonment, a feeling that no one will ever truly see, understand, or stay. For others, it is betrayal, a crack in trust so deep that every relationship becomes a test of whether the soul can feel safe again. Some carry shame, silent but persistent, a belief that love and acceptance must be earned through suffering or perfection. Others are haunted by regret, replaying choices and moments as if the past still holds dominion over their present. This wound, hidden and unacknowledged, acts like gravity, pulling decisions, emotions, and perceptions toward its orbit, quietly dictating the contours of life. Most people do not even know their core wound exists. They call themselves unlucky, sensitive, or flawed, never realizing that their experience is not random. It is a reflection of unresolved memory and misaligned emotional energy. These wounds become the lens through which the world is perceived. Every interaction, every disappointment, every fleeting triumph is filtered through that wound. It creates unconscious scripts that repeat endlessly, patterns in love, cycles of self-sabotage, hesitations in personal growth, and invisible resistance to joy. People are trapped not by events themselves, but by the meaning they have unconsciously given them. The wound becomes a hidden blueprint, shaping life silently, imperceptibly, yet with undeniable power. Many claim they want to heal, yet fear healing more than they fear the wound. Pain has been a constant companion, a familiar rhythm. It may have arrived as suffering, but in its familiarity, it becomes home. Letting it go feels like stepping into unknown territory without a map. The psyche resists, not because it loves pain, but because the structure of identity has grown around it. To release the wound feels, to the mind and body, like erasing a part of oneself. This is why people cling to victimhood, self-blame, or the drama of regret. They are addicted to the narrative, to the energetic resonance of suffering, to the patterns they mistakenly call security. True healing requires radical honesty. It requires seeing the wound clearly without flinching, acknowledging it without shame, and finally transforming the energy it holds. The past does not need to be rewritten. It needs to be recontextualized. The trauma is not erased, but its grip is loosened. The guilt is not denied, but its authority over self-worth is removed. Regret is not ignored, but its dominion over decision-making is ended. This is accomplished not through effort, not through forcing change, but through conscious recognition and the reorientation of internal energy. There exists a mechanism that ancient mystics and psychologists alike have understood, even if in different language. The soul cannot be free while bound to a wound. It is the invisible contract between the past and consciousness that must be consciously broken. It requires awareness, courage, and the deliberate act of release. And this is why the sentence works. I let it be as it is, and I set myself free. It does not fight the wound. It does not deny it. It does not attempt to fix it. Instead, it acknowledges reality, honors the experience, and simultaneously asserts sovereignty over the self. By speaking it with awareness, the energetic contract that has maintained suffering begins to dissolve. Healing also requires patience and presence. The mind will resist. The body may tighten. Old patterns may emerge, tempting the soul to doubt the process. This is not failure. It is proof that the wound exists, proof that the energy is being processed, and proof that liberation is underway. Every time the sentence is repeated, it chips away at layers of subconscious attachment, like sunlight slowly melting frost. Over time, what was once heavy and defining becomes lighter, integrated, and eventually irrelevant to identity. The wound remains part of the story, but it no longer controls the narrative. When the wound loses its grip, a profound shift occurs. Relationships that once triggered old pain begin to feel neutral. Opportunities that once seemed distant now align with ease. The mind is no longer bound by past contracts of suffering. Freedom, subtle at first, expands into clarity, emotional fluidity, and self-sovereignty. And in that space, the soul remembers its original nature, whole, unbroken, and free. This is the critical truth most overlook. Liberation does not come from eliminating memory, from erasing guilt, or from pretending regret never existed. Liberation comes from acknowledging the wound, understanding its purpose, and deliberately releasing its hold over consciousness. The sentence does not magically erase the past. It rewires the mind and energy to remove the invisible chains that have bound identity. And once the chains are gone, the soul steps fully into its power, unafraid of love, trust, or the unfolding of destiny. Healing is rarely about dramatic transformation or sudden epiphanies. It is rarely about external achievement or proving that you have overcome. True liberation is subtle, quiet, and profoundly internal. It begins with a recognition that the chains binding you, chains forged from trauma, guilt, and regret, exist only because you have agreed, consciously or unconsciously, to carry them. The moment you acknowledge this, the possibility of freedom emerges. You realize that what was once perceived as immutable, unchangeable, or permanent was only a contract with memory, belief, and emotion. And contracts, by their very nature, can be broken. To walk the path back to freedom, one must first embrace radical awareness. Observe the ways in which the past continues to influence thought, emotion, and behavior. Notice the triggers, the recurrent patterns, the silent judgments about yourself and the world. Do not fight them. Do not condemn yourself for having them. Recognition is not weakness, it is the first step toward mastery. By shining the light of awareness on old wounds, you begin to dissolve the invisible prison bars. Then comes the conscious act of release. This is not about forgetting, denying, or dismissing the past. It is about consciously letting it be, while simultaneously reclaiming authority over your inner world. The mechanism is deceptively simple. By speaking the sentence, "I let it be as it is, and I set myself free," with full awareness and intention, you signal to the subconscious mind that it no longer needs to sustain the energetic attachment to pain. You are not erasing memory. You are ending its dominion over your life. You are interrupting the habitual loop that has kept suffering alive. Each repetition of this sentence chips away at emotional resistance, slowly freeing consciousness from the weight it has carried for years or decades. The process is gradual but profound. At first, the sentence may feel hollow, like a whisper in a storm of unresolved emotion, but with consistent practice it begins to align the mind and body. Emotions once locked in the chest start to release naturally. Tension dissipates. Thought patterns become less compulsive. Relationships that once triggered unconscious reactions begin to feel lighter, easier, more fluid. Opportunities that previously seemed blocked by invisible forces now emerge with synchronicity. This is not magic in the fantastical sense. It is the natural result of consciousness recalibrating itself in alignment with truth. Breathing into the moment is an essential part of this path. When memories, guilt, or regret arise, allow yourself to feel them fully without resistance. Observe the physical and emotional sensations and speak the sentence deliberately, intentionally, as if speaking to the deepest layers of your being. Feel the energy of release moving through you. Recognize that attachment to the past is optional. Recognize that freedom is always available the instant you choose it. Healing on this level requires patience, persistence, and self-compassion. The mind may resist, the body may tighten, old fears may surface. These are not signs of failure, they are proof that the energy is being processed and transformed. Emotional resistance is a measure of attachment, and attachment, once consciously addressed, dissolves naturally. The more you engage with the sentence, the more subconscious programming aligns with conscious will. Over time, the repetition becomes internalized. It moves beyond words and becomes a living principle within the psyche. Freedom is ultimately a state of self-sovereignty. It is the realization that the past no longer commands your identity, the recognition that emotional patterns no longer dictate perception, and the understanding that you are not defined by what has happened to you. You reclaim authority over thought, emotion, and energy, stepping into a space of alignment with your higher self. In this space, consciousness is no longer reactive, it becomes deliberate. Life is no longer something that happens to you, it becomes something you consciously navigate. The path back to inner freedom is not linear. There will be days when old wounds resurface, when guilt feels palpable, when regret whispers its familiar lies. But each time this occurs, you are presented with the opportunity to reaffirm your liberation. By returning to the sentence, by consciously releasing, by observing without judgment, you reinforce the recalibration of your inner world. Slowly, the repetition becomes a rhythm, It becomes a current that carries you forward, away from the chains of the past and toward a life aligned with presence, awareness, and sovereign choice. In this way, freedom is not a destination, it is a lived practice. It is the ongoing act of choosing release over resistance, clarity over confusion, and empowerment over entrapment. Step by step, repetition by repetition, the invisible prison dissolves, leaving only consciousness in its pure, unbound form. And in that unbound state, the soul remembers itself as it was always meant to be, whole, sovereign, and free. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you have always been beneath the layers of pain, guilt, and regret. The past may have shaped you, but it does not define you. The experiences that once felt like shackles were in truth invitations, opportunities for the soul to reclaim sovereignty over its own reality. Every moment of suffering, every pang of guilt, every echo of regret was not punishment, but a call to awaken to a deeper truth, that power was never lost. It was always within you, waiting for recognition. The moment you consciously release the energetic grip of trauma, guilt, and regret, a profound transformation occurs. The internal landscape that once felt like a battlefield becomes a sanctuary. Emotional turbulence calms, thought patterns stabilize, and identity begins to feel whole again. You no longer carry the invisible contracts that dictated fear, doubt, or limitation. You stand, for the first time in a long time, in alignment with the truth of your own consciousness, free, unbound, sovereign. This return to power is subtle, yet all-encompassing. It is not about control over others, nor mastery of circumstances, nor external achievement. True power is the ability to navigate reality with clarity and inner authority. It is the recognition that you are not at the mercy of your past. You are not a prisoner of memory, guilt, or regret. You are the conscious architect of experience. And with this understanding comes liberation. The past becomes a teacher, not a jailer. Mistakes become lessons, not lifelong sentences. Failures become fuel for growth, not evidence of unworthiness. The sentence, "I let it be as it is and I set myself free," is the key to this reclamation. Speak it until it saturates every level of being, until it no longer requires thought and becomes instinctive. Speak it when memories rise unbidden. Speak it when the chest tightens with guilt. Speak it when regret loops through the mind. Each repetition is a declaration of sovereignty, a conscious act of rewriting the energy that shapes reality. Slowly, the soul integrates the truth that freedom is not granted externally, it is reclaimed internally. In reclaiming power, the soul also steps into alignment with destiny. Life unfolds differently when consciousness is no longer bound by unseen forces. Relationships change, not because people become different, but because your perception of them shifts. Opportunities arise with synchronicity. Challenges no longer feel like insurmountable barriers, but invitations to expand. The world responds to the internal transformation, because consciousness is the ultimate magnet. What you are internally shapes what you encounter externally. This is the return to power, the profound, mystical understanding that the self is the origin of all experience. Trauma, guilt, and regret are no longer masters, they are teachers whose lessons have been fully learned. The chains dissolve, and the soul walks unencumbered into the present moment. There is a quiet authority in this state, a serenity that radiates without effort. It is the natural expression of alignment with higher consciousness, the subtle but undeniable presence of self-mastery at the deepest level. To live in this state is to exist as a conscious co-creator of reality. The past can be remembered without emotional charge. The present can be fully inhabited without fear. The future can be envisioned without limitation. And the soul, having traversed the labyrinth of suffering and emerged intact, becomes a living testament to the hidden truth of life. That liberation was never something to find outside. It was always something to reclaim within. Repeat the sentence. Feel it, live it. Let it saturate every thought, every emotion, every fiber of being. I let it be as it is and I set myself free. In doing so, you do more than release the past. You awaken to the extraordinary reality that the power you sought was never lost, only forgotten. And now, remembered, it flows freely through every choice, every moment, and every possibility. You are whole, you are sovereign, you are free. And with that freedom, the universe itself becomes your mirror, reflecting the unshakable truth of your awakened soul.